Well, it's still very cold outside, but it is finally time to start my peppers and my tomatoes. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name's Chris. If you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. And it is finally time to start the summer vegetables. These are going to be primarily my tomatoes, my peppers. Let's see, I'm starting parsley. And I think that's about it today. But what I want to talk about here, if you're new to gardening and you've never really started your seeds indoors, is when to start your seeds. Now again, today we're starting peppers and tomatoes because they take a very long time to get up to size to produce. So we want to get a jump start on the season. Now I'm still a good 6 weeks from my last frost date, and peppers and tomatoes really like the heat. So I can't put them out in the ground yet, but I can start them indoors, get them started, get them up to size before I plant them out in the garden and get, like I said, a jump start on the season. If I waited until it was optimal time to, warm enough outside to plant them in the ground and started them in the ground out there, then I'm going to be lucky if I get peppers and tomatoes before the end of the season, before the frost sets in, because it just takes so long for them to go that way. So, general rule of thumb is 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date, you want to start your things like your peppers and your tomatoes. Some of those things like zucchini, cucumber, watermelon, any of those kinds of vining plants that get great big. Zucchini doesn't vine, but it gets great big very, very fast. You want to wait a little bit longer before you plant them. Honestly, cucumber grows so fast and cantaloupe, and I just start those straight in the ground. I don't find a need to start them indoors beforehand. Summer squash and zucchini I will start indoors, but I'm going to wait a couple of weeks to do that, because what happens is once they sprout, I'm going to have to transplant them out to bigger pots, and before long they're going to be huge plants, and I just don't have enough storage room for those. And they grow so fast there's no need to get them any sooner than that. So again, 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date, start off with your peppers, your tomatoes, those kinds of things. My average last frost date is April 15th. Today is March, what is today, the 10th? I believe 11th. Yeah, 11th, I think. So I'm a little bit closer than 6 weeks from my average last frost date. I'm only about 4 weeks, but I like to push that average last frost dates a couple of weeks later. Our average is April 15th, but sometimes it's cold all the way up till the first week of May. And a couple of years ago, we had snow on the first day of May, which is very rare, but it happens. So I don't go exactly by the last frost date. It's an average. I push it a couple of weeks, and I plan on putting my peppers, my tomatoes, my heat-loving vegetables in the ground somewhere around the first, second week of May, so 6 to 8 weeks before that. Now, if you're looking for when do you start things in your area, it's pretty easy to figure out what your average last frost date is. Just type it into Google, average last frost date for whatever zip code you are in, and it will tell you what your average is. You might want to add, like I said, 2 weeks or so on to the end of that and count that as your last frost date. And then there's a fantastic planning calendar at Johnny's Select Seeds, Johnny's Seeds. And I'll leave a link down below where you can click on that. And if you just plug in your average last frost date or whatever date that you decide you want to put those things in the ground, it will spit out a chart that tells you exactly when to start everything. Whatever it is that you want to start, whether you're starting it indoors, starting it outside, it tells you all of that. So it's a great little guide. It's one of the best I've seen. But as far as starting your plants, it works the same for pretty much any kind of plant you want to do. Several ways to do that. This is the way that I do it. First things first, what kind of soil do you want to use to start your plants in? You don't want to use soil, you want to use a good seed starting mix. And this is a good one. This is an easy one. Jiffy brand. It doesn't really matter which one you use. Pretty much all this is just peat moss and vermiculite. And it's sterile. It doesn't have any kind of real organic matter in it, and that's kind of important. You don't want to just start your seeds in like a potting mix, like you would pot your house plants in with fertilizer in it and stuff, because all that organic matter in there, you're going to keep these pretty wet until they actually sprout, and that can lead to mold and mildew and a lot of those things building up in there, which can damage your plants. So and the plants themselves, they don't need any kind of fertilizer to get started. The seed produces all the nutrients that plant needs to get started and get growing. So again, start with a sterile seed starting mix. Now what I suggest is dump this in a bucket or something and moisten it up. You want it pretty damp. Where's my glove here? There we go. There's my glove. You want it pretty damp. You don't want to be able to wring water out of it, but you want it like wet sponge consistency. I don't think you can see that on camera. wet sponge consistency, where it kind of clumps a little bit whenever you squeeze it together. And that's important because if you just put that dry potting mix or seed starting mix into your containers, and then when you water it, it's going to want to float to the top and it's going to disrupt your seeds and all those kinds of things. So start with a good damp, get it pretty good and wet first. And it's easier to do that in a big bucket than it is to try to do it once you've got it in the pots itself. But the process is pretty simple. I'm just going to fill up these little containers. These are just seed starting containers. Fill them up with seed starting mix and pack it down pretty good so that's in the container real well. I put a glove on just to keep my fingernails a little bit cleaner because it's always hard to get that dirt out of them. Let me get these packed full and then we'll come back and show you the next step. All right, so I've got the dirt packed in my little seed starting trays here, and these are just standard nursery pots, that I got. Probably bought plants in them and just saved the pots afterwards. Pack it down pretty good. You don't want it too loosely packed because if you do loosely pack it, whenever you water, it's going to compact down. You're going to lose a lot of ground. But as far as planting the seeds, it's pretty easy. I like to use a pencil, and I just make a little hole just about that deep. You don't want to plant seeds too deep. That's one of probably the most common reasons why seeds do not germinate is planting them too deep. And I just make a little hole in each one of these. And then I'm going to get my seeds, and what I'm planting here is just some parsley. But it doesn't really matter what seeds I'm planting. They all start the same way. Let me get a couple of seeds out of here real quick. And these seeds are tiny. And then I just take 2 or 3 seeds, drop them down in that hole, in each one of these holes. And it's good to get, like I said, 2 or 3 because, you may not, if you just put 1 in each one, it may not germinate. You have 2 or 3, then you get a lot better chances of getting them to germinate. Now, chances are you'll probably have more than 1 seed germinate, and you'll get 2 or 3 plants growing in each pot. That's not a big deal. Once these things sprout and they get up, about so high, just pick the strongest one, pinch the others off. Now, you can sometimes, it's a little bit tricky with things like parsley, but some of your other hardier plants like tomato and stuff like that, let them get a good root base, and you might be able to separate them out and get multiple plants out of that. But it's a little bit tricky. I don't do that. And then once the seeds are in there, just cover them up with just a little bit of soil. They don't need much over the top of them, just a little bit. And water them in real good. Now this is my favorite waterer because you just pump it up. It puts a nice fine mist out, and you can water your plants with it without having to pump. You can use just a regular spray bottle, but what I find with a regular spray bottle is, I usually squeeze it a few times like that, and then my hand starts cramping up on me. So I like this one. You just pump it up, and it puts out a nice fine mist, and it's just a continuous spray. And you want to keep these pretty good and damp until they actually sprout. And once they actually sprout, then you can back off a little bit on the watering. You don't want to let them dry out at that point, but you don't need to keep them nearly as wet. What I generally do is once these things sprout and they get up about that tall, I stop watering from the top and start watering from the bottom, but that'll be covered in a future video. Now the other thing that you can do to make sure these things don't dry out, if you're in a climate like mine, it's incredibly dry in the summertime, is use a humidity dome of some type. I like this one. It just goes right over the top. But it doesn't matter what you use. You could put a piece of saran wrap over the top of these. You could, anything. They don't need light to germinate, so it could be another tray. It could be a piece of cardboard over the top of it. Whatever you want to use is fine. It just keeps them from drying out. Now, once they sprout, once you see the seedlings start to come up above the dirt, you want to remove that humidity dome. You don't want that on there anymore. All right, let me get a few more seeds planted here, and then I'll take you in and I'll show you what we're going to do with them next. All right, so once we've got these seeds started, planted anyway, there's not a whole lot you need to do. Just set them in a place. Try to keep it fairly warm. If you're having a hard time getting your seeds to germinate, adding some kind of heat to like a heat mat or something underneath them can help a little bit with that. Some seeds will require a little bit of warmth to germinate, so putting them in a warm place. I've got a heater vent right here on the floor, so this room stays pretty warm. I don't need to actually do any extra heat, but you may find that necessary. Again, I like to use a humidity dome of some kind to put them over there and keep them from drying out. What I'm going to do is come back and water these things just a couple of times a day to make sure that they stay good and damp and that they don't dry out. Once they germinate, take that humidity dome off and I'm going to let them grow just a little bit. But as soon as they germinate, as soon as the seeds break the soil, they're going to go underneath these lights. This is probably the part where most people make the biggest mistake. When your seedlings germinate and they sprout above the ground, they've got to have light, and they've got to have a lot of light. So these lights are going to go down, I mean, just as close to the plant as I can get them. I've got these on chains and on hooks, so I can raise them and lower them wherever I need them. But just as close as I can get them to the plant without actually touching the plant, I mean, just on top of them, as close as you can possibly get them. And these are just two standard shop lights. They're like $10 at most big box stores. And the bulbs that I'm using, I've got a warm bulb and a cool bulb. So one with a higher Kelvin rating, one with a lower Kelvin rating. When you buy the bulbs, you can see on there, it tells you whether it's a warm bulb or a cool bulb. I've got one of each in each one of these fixtures and two of them. And this works pretty well. I can put two trays on this shelf right underneath here and get them going. And then I'm going to shoot some future video and follow these all the way through to where I get them in the ground, grow them up through the season. But, you know, that's pretty much it to get them going. Put them under the lights. Now, once they get going, when they first start sprouting, they're all going to look the same. So make sure you label your seed starting trays, what they are. Just write it on a piece of tape, stick it on there. And once they, you know, like I said, when they sprout, they're all going to look exactly the same. And they'll grow a little while, probably about a week, and then they'll get their first set of true leaves in. When they get their first set of true leaves in, we're going to need to repot those, move them out of this seed starting mix and into an actual potting mix, into a bigger pot. And that's the point where they need some kind of fertilizer and they need some kind of feed. I don't add any additional fertilizer. I just use a potting mix with compost in it. That's what I use. If you want to fertilize your seedlings at that point, then you want to do that at like a quarter strength, what you would do like a regular plant. Really, they don't need much at all. So don't go overboard with the fertilizer. That's pretty much it as far as getting them started. Like I said, I'll follow these plants through. So if you're just starting out and you want to follow me through this process, then by all means do it. I'll make sure I keep the videos up to date with what step I'm in. But at this point, it's just keeping them watered every day. Now they should start sprouting here in just a couple of days, and then they'll go right underneath the lights. And these lights are just again, just super cheap lights. You don't need anything real special, but you do need it real close to the plant. So anyway, we'll come back and shoot that video when it's time to get these things transplanted. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, God bless.